Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans.
Parents, please be advised that this episode should be listened to by parents first before sharing with your children. It's best to listen to the sensitive material in this episode first so that you're prepared to help support your children in navigating the conversations we're about to discuss. So if children are in your presence, please listen to this episode at another time.
Hi guys, welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here today. Hopefully you're enjoying our episodes. Today we're going to talk about a really important topic. This is about grooming, and this isn't about personal hygiene. This is about sexual abuse and grooming and the behaviors that perpetrators go through to find their victims. And it is not going to be what you think it is. And this is going to be such an important conversation. So we have Michelle Denault back, and she is a national speaker on this topic, and she is going to share the information she has with us. Welcome back, Michelle.
Thank you for having me back. I feel like we should share Christmas cards at this point, don't you? Like,
I think so,
we should buy gifts for each other or something like that.
Well, we're so glad. These have been so informative. So I'm so glad that you're here to give us a more in-depth look at grooming, because this is something really important for parents and teens and kids to know about.
Yes,
so what
absolutely.
is grooming? What is this? What does it mean?
Well, the technical definition is that grooming is a pattern behavior designed to increase opportunity and minimize victim resistance and withdrawal. And when I say, it's just to reduce disclosure and belief as well as part of the definition. Well, when I say belief, I mean by the victim. like when we hear reduce disclosure and belief, or, minimize belief, we think people believing the victim is what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about the victim often has no idea what is happening to them. And it's a 7-step process. A lot of people say it's a 6-step process, but create a secret relationship is one of the steps that I use in mine. I think it's very important to talk about that one, especially in the groomed with love situation. But it's a 7-step process that predators go through. It's very calculated. Unfortunately, thanks to social media, we have some really wrong definitions of grooming out there right now. Mm-hmm. And it is a very, very intricate process. I call my training the predator's playbook. It's like a playbook. They almost follow a certain system to be able to abuse kids. It doesn't happen overnight. It's now you can have online grooming situations that with extortion that can happen pretty quickly. But when we're talking a one-on-one situation with an in-person predatory situation, that is a process that predator has to go through, because they are often associated with that victim. As I've said before, 93% of the time, they know and trust the assailant. So that assailant has to be very careful. They do. And I tell kids that grooming works in 2 ways. It's how an adult gains the trust of a child so they can abuse them. But I do tell kids it's how a peer can gain the trust of another peer so they can abuse them. Because people who find themselves in domestic violence relationships have also been abused. The second way is it's how that peer or that adult portrays themselves to the rest of the world so they can abuse. They portray themselves in a certain way to the rest of the world. They are usually your Hall of Fame coach, teacher of the year, the most popular person in your community. Well, we can go through tons of examples. Bill Cosby groomed an entire nation into thinking he was the father of TV. And he was able to rape 61 women that way. Larry Nassar, groomed an entire organization into thinking he was this great guy. So they groom the adults into believing they're a certain way, and they groom their victims into believing in them and trusting in them. So that's what it is.
Yeah. So what are the 7 stages of grooming? You've talked about this, so I'm curious to hear what the stages are.
Step 1 is to target the victim. And as I always say, there's no one singular trait in every victim. Mm-hmm. There's just not. This happens to good kids. This happens to bad kids. And I don't really think we got bad kids, but we've been breaking it down to that since the days of the movie Grease, right? We had the Sandra D's and the Rizzos. And it really doesn't matter if you're filthy with virginity like Sandra D or if you're taking a pregnancy test like Rizzo in the bathroom. Every single kid's a target. Everyone. And as I tell people, they usually do try to pick the kid with the lowest potential for exposure. They absolutely do. But what we've really failed to understand is lowest potential for exposure could just be the kid who's trying to throw the discus a little bit further. So they're hanging out with that coach all the time. There's that one-on-one. The kid who's really trying to get into their faith. So they're hanging out with that youth pastor all the time. And nobody thinks anything about that because these just generally look like mentoring relationships. So that always starts with an interview process. And they never just interview one kid. They interview a lot of kids because they're looking for that response I've talked about before, to pick their ultimate victim. They're looking for the response that they want, that they know that they can choose that child and they're probably not going to get exposed. So as I've told you, they just start to like push the outside of the envelope with that child. What they do is they're just trying to desensitize them a little, start talking about sexual topics after they talk about your family. You know, it's very basic in the beginning. Like I said, you've got a great smile. I've said that before. And then it just moves into a little bit more stuff that's a little more secretive. Step 2 is to gain the victim's trust. And as I tell people when I train, I really thought for a long time what my teacher abuser did to gain my trust. Like, what did he say? What did he do that made me trust him so much? And then I came to the realization that he didn't have to do anything at all, just by the nature of who he was. I mean, what do we teach our kids? They can do with their teachers. They can trust them. We teach our kids to trust, respect, and obey their teachers, their coaches, youth leaders, pastors, law enforcement. We teach our kids to trust and respect titles, not people. And what I truly find fascinating is we tell our kids that trust is earned, but we expect them to just give it blindly to anybody who has a title. And unfortunately, that can be dangerous because some really bad people step into the shoes of some really honorable titles and they become the stranger beside everybody so they can abuse kids. So gaining trust sometimes is not that long of a process because some people automatically have been taught to be trusted by our children. So step 3 is to fill a need in the child. And people automatically think, well, my kid doesn't have any needs. I fill all their needs. Everyone has needs. Everybody on the planet wants to feel special. Everyone. Like I said, you could be the kid who's just trying to throw the discus a little bit further. So you're hanging out with that coach. Or you could be the kid whose parents are getting divorced and you just need somebody to talk to. Or in my presentation, I show a picture of myself and say, you can be the kid who just didn't like herself that much. And I show what my mother did to my hair. And as I said, I'm 53 years old and I'm never going to forgive my mother for doing that to my hair ever. I mean, and I had this poodle perm and clearly I wasn't a snappy dresser. In my presentation, I show a picture of a Smurf shirt I'm wearing. I mean, and what teenager do you know that has self-confidence? So that they come in and they fill a need and it's not that hard. With teens, they have a natural want for love and a normal sexual curiosity. Okay. So they come in and they fill that need, whatever it may be. And the examples I use to show in my presentation, or I say, that was a great catch you made at the game the other night. If you're still struggling with your pitch, why don't you stay after and I'll help you with that? Just you and me, one-on-one. You killed it on your math test. If you're still struggling with fractions, why don't you come over to the house tonight and I'll tutor you? Just you and me. And I tell people, it's really that simple. It is. That's the fill the need portion. Every step from 1 to 3, we're not looking for it. And I tell people, abuse happens because of what we don't see at steps 1 through 3 and what we absolutely choose to see when we get to step 4. And when I start my program, I talk about step 4 before I even get into step 1, because step 4 is isolate the victim. And isolation is the hallmark of abuse. Isolation is why Gabby Petito was on a video crying and taking responsibility for her own abuse, because she had been isolated to only him. They isolate their victim to only them. And I show them an example back from my own hometown I'd gotten several calls about a possible abuser in the hall about 3 years ago. And I called back and asked people, what do you think of Mr. So-and-so? Is he a good teacher? And everybody said the same thing I talked to, from 15 to 50. Well, you must be talking about the fact that he's having sex with, and they named the student. And then they said this about him. Well, he's popular. All the girls like him. Mm-hmm. He's so great with our students. Did you know he was student teacher of the year at SIU? And then they said this about the girl. Well, she's a whore. Do you know how many boys she's had sex with? She's a known drama queen. That's us looking through a certain lens when we get to step 4, okay? We don't want to see this person we honor in the light that's being shed on them. We're not ready for that. So we have to look at the victim and make them the problem. They've caused this. They're seeking that attention. So that happens because that victim is going to that abuser. They've been isolated to them. Mm-hmm. They don't think they're being abused. Well, especially when it's a love situation. They're spending time with that person. And as I tell people in the training, step 4 for me was, I look at them and I go, you think I was hanging out with my friends during the day at school? No, I was hanging out with him. You think I was talking to my parents about stuff? No, I was going to him for everything. Yeah. He had become my best friend, my confidant, my source of care and concern. Once that is your source of care and concern, you are isolated to that person. And it makes that incredibly easy for them to abuse you because the rest of the world is looking at you as the problem. At step 4, when you have these situations, especially in institutional settings, the focus turns to the victim. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that a victim of some kind of abuse in a church, these teens and preteens, I can't tell you how many times I have heard that they were the aggressor. The victim, because that's all they're seeing. They're seeing that victim go see that person. If you're being abused, why would you want to see them? They don't get that it's a grooming process and they don't understand what's happening to them. Yeah. So isolation is huge. It is the hallmark. And that is step 4. And once again, the peers see it, the adults see it. And instead of seeing it as a problem with the person who's preying on the kid, they see the kid as being the problem oftentimes. Step 5 is to create that secret relationship. At that stage, the abuser makes the victim responsible for keeping their secret. Mm-hmm. They figure out ways to make that victim not tell. And as I said, in your typical grooming model, that can be fear. If you tell, I'll kill your parents. But in my situation, it wasn't that. I talk about a moment where my abuser said, you wanted this. You asked for this. You come see me all the time. Mm-hmm. I thought you were mature enough for this relationship. Well, he said that. And then he said that if I couldn't keep my mouth shut, he would have to leave me. Asked me if I wanted to see him lose his job and be pumping gas for the rest of his life. Because once again, he didn't tell me he was doing anything wrong. He never told me he was hurting me. He said that he could lose his job because he was married. And that's why I had to keep our secret. You want me to see me lose my job and be pumping gas for the rest of my life? So now it's my responsibility to keep him safe. It's the victim's responsibility to keep them safe. And I will tell you right now, everything in that moment for me and other survivors I know who've been in the same kind of situation, the worst thing he said to me in that moment was, if you can't keep your mouth shut, I'm going to have to leave you. Mm-hmm. He was my first love. And I will tell you, I saw a talk with a gentleman called Randy and me. His name's Kevin. And he was young. It was his soccer coach. And the thing that just hit me right in the gut was he said, when you have a child that you've told them they're being abused and they don't understand that necessarily, you have to understand that that child is not just dealing with the revelation that they've been abused, but they're also betraying their very best friend. And that's true. Mm-hmm. A lot of times this is this kid's very best friend, their confidant, possibly who they think is the love of their life. I would have married this guy. And I can name you a lot of the 4.5 million educated abuse survivors that would have married their abuser. They truly thought it was love. So we have to be very careful with that. In this situation, these kids are willing to take a bullet for these abusers. And the abusers know that. So they set that up with creating a secret relationship. They make that child responsible for protecting them. And they do that by instilling loyalty. I mean, I love you. If, we don't want to lose our relationship, or you don't want to lose what we have, or you don't want to see something bad happen to me. That's step 5. They create that environment. That step can even come before 6, which is sexual contact. They can establish that secret relationship before, but really instill it after 6. Like it's both sides of that step. 5 is. So step 6 is to initiate sexual contact. And as I tell people, it takes them a long time to get here. They have to work really hard. They have to target that victim. They have to fill a need in their life, isolate them. They have to go through all of those things, create that secret relationship. Then they can initiate sexual contact. And I tell people, these are adults trying to do sexual things with kids. Even if the kid as a teen or a preteen who thinks it's a love relationship and this is the next natural step in a love relationship, they have to make it seem just like it's awkward. Like kids are fumbling in the back seat. I say drive in, and then I realize that students I'm talking to have no clue what a drive-in is anymore. But it comes to me, I'm like, it's a drive-in when you're fumbling around. I'm like, never mind, none of you know what a drive-in is. But back in my day, like Greece, you went to the drive-in and you're fumbling around and nobody knows what they're doing. So that feels natural. So these people have to make it look awkward to kids. So it starts with those good touches we've taught our kids about. I mean, come on, we've taught our kids that good touches are hugs, fist bumps, high fives, pats on the back. And bad touches are hitting and kicking and biting. And if something bad's happening to you, you'll feel uncomfortable. Well, my abuser never hit me, never kicked me, sure gave me a lot of hugs, gave me a lot of pats on the back, made me feel incredibly special. So sometimes we've told our kids these things, not realizing that this person comes in and becomes your child's best friend and confidant. And they use everything we've taught our kids are good: love, care, kindness, and concern to be in a relationship with them. And there's nothing at all that feels uncomfortable about that. But they have to make that very gradual. It starts with that pat on the back, that hug, that high five, that moves into something else where they're pulling away from you and they give you a slight kiss on the cheek, and then that moves to a kiss on the lips. It's very gradual. Sexual contact is what I call a slow burn. And I tell people in my training that when you hear the word abuse, you think of fear. You do.
Sure.
You think of hitting, violence, yelling, whatever. And when you hear the word rape, you think of somebody who doesn't give what? Consent.
Yeah.
But not everybody abuses with fear. Some people abuse with love, and not everybody rapes with force. Some people manipulate kids into consenting to their own sexual violation. So then they can blame them because they've consented. And the rest of the world, because we don't understand grooming and we have these societal misconceptions, blame the kid too. Okay. So now you've got a situation where you've got a kid being abused. They think they're possibly in a love relationship, but even if it's a kid who is being abused, they don't even know how to tell, because a kid that knows, even when you got a kid who knows, they struggle to tell. The video I show, she knows what's happening is wrong, but she's afraid to tell because she doesn't want to get him in trouble because she thinks it's her fault. She's let him touch her. She's gone places with him. She's let him become her adult best friend and her confidant. And I tell kids, that is what grooming does. It makes a kid think of one of two things: that either it must be really bad for somebody that great to do something that terrible, or they must be really special for somebody that amazing to be willing to risk it all to be in love with them and spend their life with them. And I tell kids, but it's neither one of those things. It's abuse, because adults are not supposed to be having sex with children. They're not legally allowed to have sex with children. They should not want to have sex with children. But we as a society have bought into it being an inappropriate relationship because that's what we're more comfortable with. It's like we're not ready to see the people we honor in the life that's being shed on them. So step 7, the last step, is control. This is what really instills that confusion in that victim. It's a push-pull. 1 second, you are the center of that abuser's universe. They cannot live without you. They can't imagine life without you. And the next moment, I didn't have to choose you. I could have chosen any girl in this school.
Mm-hmm.
You should be grateful. The next minute you're hanging on for dear life to the love of your life. 1 minute they're, your hero. That is so confusing for a kid. Like I said, they are at a pivotal point of emotional development. And contrary to popular belief that molestation only happens to littles, 66% of sexually abused kids are between 12 and 18. They are at a pivotal point of emotional development. There is ease of access to them to do these grooming steps. They're away from their parents more. Society tends to blame the victim. It makes it a lot easier to groom and abuse them. And I was on a call one day to somebody who worked with predators in prison, and they said that's why they picked this age group. They picked that age group because they have ease of access to them. The victim gets blamed, and they get less time in prison if their victim is 13 or over. So don't think you've escaped that process. If you have a teen, they are at a extremely high risk for this to happen to them. So step 7 is it's that control phase. And in that control phase is where they really instill that loyalty. Like I said, I can't imagine my life without you. And you can spend a lifetime thinking you had a boyfriend instead of an abuser. Mm-hmm. You can spend a lifetime thinking, well, I can't hurt him. I can't, that was my best friend, or wow, they loved me when nobody else did. Or, mm-hmm. I'm nothing without them. Nobody will ever love me like that person. That's where that control phase comes in. And that is the space where a child will spend a lifetime possibly never telling, or a lifetime not understanding. Mm-hmm. So those are the steps broken down in short form.
No, yeah. I mean, that's so helpful to think about, because I think knowing that it's such a process is important, because it doesn't just happen overnight. It's a relationship that's built with intention, right?
And they don't just groom kids. Like I said, they groom the adults around them. They want you to think mm-hmm. that they are this great individual and they're looking out for your child and they're mentoring them or whatever it may be. And when I train, I really, really, I break it down with a youth pastor, a softball coach, and a teacher. And I ask people, how many of you have dropped your kids off for a softball lesson and sat in your car? Because I show them a news article where that's when he was having sex with his athletes when they were supposed to be taking hitting lessons. Do you think about that when you drop your kid off at a softball lesson? How many of you have had your softball coach or a teacher say, hey, my wife and I want to go to dinner. Can your child babysit for us? Does that throw a red flag for you? This guy was abusing his athletes, taking them home from babysitting his kids. He was using that opportunity. Yeah. I have a survivor friend who did that. The teacher, I go, when you drop your kids off at school, are you thinking about their teachers abusing them? I mean, there's a 1 in 10 chance, but is that the biggest concern you have that day? Have you talked to them about that? Mm-hmm. No, usually people are, like I said, they're worried about, shootings, bullying, whatever it may be. And then I show them an article with a youth pastor. I go, how many of you would trust your youth pastor to counsel your kid in your time of need? How many of you have set your kid to church camp? Do you think about your youth pastor abusing your child? That's ease of access. Mm-hmm. And I just really try to instill in people that these are the things we're seeing. I have my audience I have my audience Google 2 words, teacher, sexual, and hit the news tab. And I tell them that they can go and put in pastor sexual or coach sexual. They're going to get the same result, but for right then we do that. And I have them look through all the news articles. Mm-hmm. I would implore your entire audience to Google teacher sexual and hit your news tab and look at every news article that's come out recently implicating teachers, pastors, youth leaders, whatever, in grooming and abusing kids. It is going to scare you to death. I also would implore your audience to read what's called the Pennsylvania Diocese Report, the grand jury report. It's a public document. You can go read it. When the Pennsylvania Diocese had so many abuses, they convened a grand jury and had the FBI come in and get their documents. Well, the FBI came in and got their documents. And up to that point, only the bishop had a key. And the FBI says that it looked like a playbook for covering up abuse of children. And they go through how the church said, do not say rape in the documents. Use inappropriate contact or boundary issues. If a priest is found to be raping children, they still had to provide them with housing and living expenses. If a priest is on leave, don't tell anybody why. Say he's suffering from nervous exhaustion. If you do catch them, don't call the police. Keep it in-house. I mean, that alone, if you read that, will show you how groomers groom an entire society to allow them to continue. It becomes a culture in most places, and it becomes an accepted practice that is so looked beyond that it's becoming an epidemic in our schools. It really is.
Yeah, it's crazy to think 1 in 10. I mean,
Yes.
whoa.
And that statistic's actually from 2004. That was done for the U.S. Department of Education. Carol Shakeshaft did that as a study. And that was before cell phones and social media. So think about that. Think of those numbers now. And people always tell me, well, we have apps that our school makes our teachers use. Okay, if a teacher's willing to abuse a student and you think they care about using Snapchat instead behind the school's back, absolutely not.
No, yeah.
And, even other things, just there's 1 in 4, according to USA Safe Sport, people can get online and look at this too. 1 in 4 athletes claims to have been sexually harassed or assaulted within their sport. 65% claiming a coach or a trainer.
Whoa.
So that's on the USA Safe Sport website. So this is something we don't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we want to get online and get on social media and listen to what everybody's saying about this about grooming and that about grooming and fall into some agendas about grooming. But we need to really, really, really learn about what grooming is correctly, because this is affecting so many of our children. And as I tell people, it's estimated that 22,000 soldiers are raped in the U.S. military every year. And I tell them that 22 soldiers a day die by suicide, but only 12 of them from the PTSD of combat. And that the Department of Veterans Affairs on their own website has acknowledged that the PTSD of being sexually assaulted in the military is equal or worse than being in combat, than the PTSD of combat. And I explain to people that's because those people trusted their fellow officers. Mm-hmm. They believed in them and they were willing to die for them. And when that's violated and betrayed, and you're not allowed access to a justice system to save an institution's image or somebody's buddy they drink with on Friday night, that brings more PTSD than being in combat. And I tell people, I just showed you all these places where children were abused, where they're supposed to trust people the most. You have a world of people walking around in a war zone and they've never even picked up a gun. We have so much trauma. And when you think about, isn't it 80% of kids will never report their own child sex abuse? 80% will never report. We're getting these statistics off what we know.
Yeah, scary.
It's scary. Parents need to educate themselves correctly. They need to allow their children to be educated. They need to demand that their institutions where their children are in educate their employees or their volunteers, whatever it may be, because that's another thing with bystander intervention. Training is your most protective factor. If you train your teachers, your athletic staff, whatever it may be, your church staff, if you train them what to look for and they know they're mandated to report that to the hotline, by the way, when you're a mandated reporter, you're not mandated to go to your supervisor. That's not popular, but that's true. You're mandated to pick up the phone and call that hotline. When you don't, trash gets passed. We call it trashing the past, passing the trash when they're allowed to resign and go to other places. Happens in sports, churches, schools. When you train people what this looks like, they are more likely to pick up the phone because they understand it. They're less likely to say, well, I don't want to ruin that person's life. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to see it happening before it escalates fully. And they're more likely to make the call and save a kid's life. Laws are important, but somebody once told me in the education realm, who's very high up in the education realm, making the laws to have people, like people have to, be fingerprinted and background checked and all that kind of stuff. That's important. But the most important thing that we can do is mandate that people have to be educated and that they are willing to be educated properly, not just through a computer program where they answer 10 questions after they've sat and let a video run for an hour.
Sure.
That will stop more child abuse than anything else. I've been told that by several people. We just have to be willing to learn what this looks like and put it into place in our own lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think a personal story is very impactful, and somebody who's passionate like you telling people about it makes a lot of sense. It's not just about the education, like somebody educated like me telling that. It's that somebody who has a personal experience and has a lot of knowledge to talk about the tricks, because people who are grooming kids are tricky people. They're people we trust. Right? Most of the time, they're people we know, people we trust, and they're tricky because you have feelings that are positive for them. But then also your body is sometimes giving you signals like, this doesn't feel quite right, but I love them, or they said this or whatever. And you're right. Or you don't have that feeling, but other people see it, and it is tricky. And so that is hard. And our body also responds. That's the tricky part too, is like with sexual contact, our body is made to respond. Even if it is not an appropriate person, like it's an adult, so they should not be having sex with kids. Our body still responds, and then victims, people who survive that, feel responsible. Like, my body responded this way, and it's like,
well, and sexual contact does feel good. It does feel good, like you said. And I'm so glad you said that, because I really want to hit on boys here. I really do. It gets lost. People don't talk about it as much. When I say 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys, 1 in 10 people is what they say now. I say this is not a girl thing. It's not. And I cannot stand when I get online and I see somebody on a news article of a female teacher who abused a male student say, gosh, I would wish we had teachers like that when I was in high school. And I don't do it as much as I used to, but I'll get on there and I'll say, okay, so go ahead and tell us that you're hot for kids. I mean, essentially, that's what you're saying is okay. Why don't you say, when I see a 15, 14-year-old kid, I go, ooh, I'd like to get me some of that. And nobody has ever responded to that to me. It's crickets after I say that, because nobody thinks it's normal for a 30-something-year-old woman to want to have sex with a 15-year-old boy. That is the Van Halen, hot for a teacher, misconstrued societal misconception. This is not a rite of passage for boys. It is incredibly damaging to them, but their body is going to react to that. And we have made it seem like it's a rite of passage. That, oh, there's my boy. No, this is not okay. This is not okay for boys. This is not okay for girls. It does so much damage to boys. And people get a little uncomfortable when I say this, but man, they get it the second I'm done. I asked my audience, how many of you have read or watched 50 Shades of Grey? And man, nobody wants to admit that in front of their colleagues. You know, everybody's just sitting there. And finally, somebody will, they'll start raising their hands. I'll go, come on, most people have seen it or heard about it in the world. What was wrong with Christian Grey? What happened to Christian Grey? He was abused by a female authority figure. It was his mother's best friend when he was 16 years old, Mrs. Robinson. That was the whole theme of the book. Everyone missed it because that's how it ends. That is why he is who he is. And he spends decades being best friends with, being business partners with Mrs. Robinson, because he thinks that she is still his friend. He loved her. She showed him the way. That's why he's a dominant, but he cannot be intimate. He doesn't allow people to touch him in certain ways. He cannot have a normal love relationship. And that's because he was sexually abused by an authority figure when he was a child, in his most important developmental stage in that time for that certain thing. And at the end of the book, he finally realizes it because she, Anna, tells him that that was wrong. It was abuse. And that's why he is the way he is. And he stands up to Mrs. Robinson. That was the whole theme of the book. It is not okay for adult females to be having sex with male children. It's not a rite of passage. And our society needs to. No 45-year-old man would want a 45-year-old man having sex with his 16-year-old daughter. So do not condone it for your 16-year-old son.
No.
They are at the same stage of development, and it's just as damaging to them. I've watched it. It's caused a lot of suicides. It really has. I've lost a lot of survivors to the heinousness of grooming. I've seen a lot of people die, and it's heartbreaking. It really is.
Wow. Okay. So as parents, how do we spot this? Is there things that we should be looking for in our kids?
Well, when I train people, you can go to a CAC. I really want to hit on this. There's any child advocacy center will tell you the signs of child abuse.
Hmm.
But I want people to listen really closely now, really closely. Those signs are usually bedwetting, truancy, academic failure, not being engaged in activities, all of those kind of things when we're talking about child sex abuse from the fear standpoint.
Hmm.
You get a kid who's been groomed into a love relationship. Do you think they're missing school?
No.
No. They want to be with that teacher.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be there. They're present. They're all in. You think they're missing sports if their coach is the one abusing them? No. They want extra lessons. They want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't always look for the kid who's disengaged. Sometimes you got to look for the kid who's overachieving. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You think kids who are being abused by a teacher are having academic difficulties? No, they want to impress that person. Do you think that they have poor hygiene? That was one of them, poor hygiene. No, they want to look good for that person.
Mm-hmm.
They think they're in a love relationship with that person. You cannot look for the basic signs when you're dealing with a groomed into love relationship. You can't always look for the underachiever, the kid who doesn't want to be touched. I didn't think it was bad touch. I wasn't afraid of him. You can't look for the person who's being hostile to authority figures. They're trying to fly under the radar so nothing happens to the authority figure they're in love with,
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be looking for different things. And what I tell people, this is a lot. I do. I go, I know this is a lot. It's a lot. What do we look for? Rumors, rumors, rumors. I'm going to say it again. Rumors, rumors, rumors. Kids are going to talk. Girls are more likely to share it with their female friends because they're girls and they think they're in love. I can't tell you how many times a predator's been caught because the girl was supposed to delete those text messages that he sent her. But when girls are in love, they want to keep that stuff so they can read it again.
Yes.
So yes. So look for those rumors. They're going to tell their friends, oh my gosh, he's so great. Okay. Look for the rumors. Kids are going to talk about it. They're going to recognize stuff. I cannot tell you one incident I've seen where I could find any situation in a church, school, athletic venue that somebody didn't have a suspicion. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about it. High-speed come-aparts. We often call kids drama queens, right? You got a kid who's in a situation where they're being abused, but they don't understand, or they even if they do understand, but especially if they're in this love relationship and they're trying to keep it all together and protect this person, and a teenager's going to have a high-speed come-apart about something. You got a kid that was a peppy, normal kid, and all of a sudden they're having high-speed come-aparts.
Something's up.
Something's up. It just, their brain can't keep up with that trauma. Boys are going to brag. And I hate to say that because once again, they've been taught that's a rite of passage. It's not that it's okay. And it's not that what's happening to them is okay, but we've seen that boys tend to tell their friends in a bragging way.
Mm-hmm.
Look for the boys that are talking about that, because I know of the situation where a mom was having sex with several of her son's friends, and they're all talking about it, and parents are hearing that, but nobody's doing anything about it. So look for that. Look for those kind of things. Look for the kid who, like I said, is the overachiever. Look for situations where you have adults spending a lot of time with kids alone. And another one I really hit on is if you've got a teacher or a coach who's giving preference to about 4 or 5 kids, like they have lunch with the same 5 kids in their room every day.
Mm-hmm.
No. If you have lunch with the principal once a month, that's different. Okay. And as one kid gets to have lunch with the principal.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got somebody who's always got the same 5 girls in their room, or the woman who's got same 5, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
No.
It's not to everybody. It's
Yes,
a certain
yes.
group, or yes. Uh-huh.
Yes. Look for the one-on-one stuff. Parents, hear me now. Everybody thinks that they've got technology under control, and they think that they don't give their kids unfettered access to technology. There is not a person alive that doesn't have a kid who at some time has unfettered access to technology. Unless you're spending 24 hours a day awake and watching your kid. And you can tell me, well, I don't let them have their phone at night when they go in their bedroom. That's great. They're at school. Do you know what they're doing at school?
Yeah.
Do they have their phone when they go to their friend's house? I mean, There's
Yeah.
my stepdaughter sits on the couch and she's texting people. Do I sit next to her and go, who are you texting the whole
Hmm.
time? Get on and see what apps your kids subscribe to. Don't just look on your kid's phone, because calculator apps, sometimes they can look like gaming apps. They can look like
Hmm.
music apps. That's where they're keeping their text messages. That's where they're keeping naked pictures. These are the things your kids have on your phone you may not know. There's a place out there you can look. Bad news is, by the time you look, they probably got a new one. So pay very much attention to what your kid is downloading on your Apple account or whatever
Hmm.
it is. Those are the kind of things that you can look for. And give your kid the space to, I don't know how to say this, but a lot of kids tell without telling. My defining day, I told without telling a lot of times. And we need to look for that. I literally told the nurse at Planned Parenthood I was having sex with one of my teachers. And all she said was, "My, the tangled web we weave when it is we first choose to deceive." And she let me get up and leave. I didn't think I needed help when I told her that,
Hmm.
but she should have picked up a phone. Sometimes kids tell us because they're talking about that person in a way that they shouldn't be talking about that person, and we're just not listening.
Hmm.
I wrote in my English journal that I was having sex with a married man that was 25 years older than me. And my English teacher wrote, "See me after class." But nobody made a call. Our kids are telling us sometimes, and we're just not listening. You've got to read between the lines, because they don't always know they need help. They don't always know it's bad. They don't always know that this is something that they shouldn't have happening to them.
Hmm.
It's our duty as adults to do right by our children, regardless of how angry they're going to get at us, how much that's going to hurt our relationship with them in the short term. It is our job to protect our children above all else. I should never have to convince anybody why protecting kids is more important than being comfortable, ever.
Yeah. So how do we talk to your kids about this? So we talked about the stages of grooming. I mean, do we break it down for them? I mean, like, how do we introduce this idea? We talked about body boundaries, like that's good.
Right.
But how do we move it to this part that they're aware of grooming and what that looks like?
I would honestly, it's hard for parents to do that unless they have some kind of model. As I said before, if I was a parent, I'd get a model for that to kind of break
Hmm.
it down. And I would talk to them about the steps. I would. We don't just tell a girl one day you'll start your period and then we walk out of the room. I mean,
Yes.
we give them what to do. We tell them what's going to
Hmm.
happen. We show them how to figure that out. We make space for them to, when that all happens. I would find a model to use, and I honestly would love to see everybody be willing to have their kids hear a training like I give. I
Hmm.
would. Because once again, you can sit down with your kid and tell them, and they're going to roll their eyes at you.
Hmm.
Be willing to let your kid participate in things where they are taught about healthy relationships, consent. Don't be afraid to let them hear those things from somebody else. I know we want that control, but our kids don't always receive it from us.
Hmm.
So if you're going to give it to your kid, find a model you can use to show your kid that it's just not you sitting down there talking about it. Like, this is the model you're using. But I highly encourage people to allow their kids to be part of programs. And I highly encourage parents to get with their schools and encourage their schools to have programs in, because they're required to have Aaron's Law programs, but the healthy relationships and grooming and that, they're not as required to have that for older kids. And the Rape Crisis Center in your area will provide those things to you. Or I will get on any plane, train, or in any car and come to any school and talk to kids on any given day. Anybody can look me up on my website at michelledenault.com. I absolutely will come to any place. But encourage your school to have these programs in for people. Rape crisis centers have internet safety, healthy relationships, grooming. They have all of that for older kids. And I can't tell you how many schools I know that don't have anything like that in for our students.
Yeah.
Encourage your school to have programs in. Carly goes in and speaks to students. Encourage your school to have these programs in. They have the budgets to do it. They make time for bullying assemblies. They make time for suicide, prevention assemblies. They make time for active shooter drills. Encourage your school to make time to protect your children from predatory behavior and to teach them how to have healthy relationships.
Yeah, this has been so incredibly important. I know that it's hard to listen to because you can't imagine your kid being taken down this path, but so important for us to be aware as parents, right? But then also to help educate our kids. And I agree, like let other people educate our kids on this so that they can hear the stuff and with their peers so they can talk about it. So then everybody knows about this. I think that's an important part to have these conversations and then follow up on it. You had talked about earlier about like if your kid had something at school, like talking to them, capitalizing on that part. So this
capitalize on that moment.
Yeah.
Yep. And I do want to add one last thing. Parents often think that if they do a good enough job, this won't happen to their kid. If they have all of these things in place, I want to tell you that myself, Faith Colson of Faith Law, another survivor friend of mine, so many survivors I know, we all had 2-parent households. Those 3 people I just mentioned to you had parents who've been married over 50 years. Okay. We had support systems in place. We had good parents, honor roll students, athletes involved in our school. Faith's mother was a teacher in the same district. Hear me now. This has nothing to do with good parenting. It has to do with kids being kids and predators being smart. And if they weren't smart, this wouldn't be the problem it is. If everybody who was a good parent could protect their children from this, we would not have the numbers we have. Do not fool yourself. Keep your eyes open, your head up, keep yourself and your kids educated.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much for all of your time today. I know that families are going to appreciate this, even though it's a hard topic to kind of digest. I think it's such an important part of raising our kids and being aware. So thank you for sharing all of your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Michelle. That was all a lot of information. Grooming is such a big topic and something that we don't talk about enough in our society. We have to do things to protect our kids. This is such an important part. And I don't know about you, but I learned in this process more about these pieces. And it was so helpful to have Michelle share her story about what she tells other families and people to help us have the words and the process. But I think most importantly, we have to be inviting people into our schools to talk to our kids about this so that they can get this message from lots of different sources so that we can protect them. With that, I'll say thank you so much for your time today. Send us emails to request episodes at accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. And also, please subscribe and give us a rating. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.